this is part two with Mr. Alan Niven, Rimshots with Sean, and we're going to talk some more drums because we had fun. First question I have, so Appetite, did you take Guns on before that album was done, or was it after? I don't remember.
I took him on in September of '86, so it was well before we started recording.
Okay, so here's the question that I have. So we talked about Steven Adler a little bit in the first part, and I do think that he's one of those guys that has a place in history. I had read somewhere that there was some talk that perhaps they weren't going to use him, and then they decided to, and I think that would have just been totally changed the sound of the band. Any
Absolute
truth to
fucking
that?
bullshit.
It's bull. Thank you for clearing that up. Thank you for clearing that
Absolute,
up.
absolute fucking bullshit. At no time was there any question that we were going to use anybody else for any reason within the band. And if you look at who I've worked with, everybody I've worked with, first of all, nobody else ever wanted them. And secondly, they are what they are. No ringers ever. People lose sight of the fact that a band takes time. It's got to stew in the pot for quite a while before it becomes a band. One of the things that used to perplex me was you'd have all these terrific players. Oh, I went to GIT and I'm a great guitar player and I'm really technical, and they'd come together, they'd record a 5-song demo, they'd shop it around the Sunset Strip, and if they didn't get signed, they'd all break up and go and get into different formations. Well, you ain't going to get anywhere. You might eventually get the occasional Toto out of that, but you're not going to get a real fucking band. And being English, once upon a time, the English used to understand what a real fucking band was better than the rest of the world.
Right.
But a band takes time. It's got to percolate. It's got to find its personality. It's got to find its expression. Guns definitely had an expression at the time. From the demos that Zoot Out recorded with Manny Charlton, my perception was it's fast. It's definitely got energy. The singer sings through the upper part of his nose too much. What we may have here is a really cool underground band, but we brought in the right producer engineer, got rid of the ones that Geffen wanted. Geffen wanted them to record at Pasha with Spencer Proffer.
Right.
And I was like, no, that's not what I see in this band. So Clint came in, and the song settled a bit, and it wasn't so determinedly we're going to be a LA punk. It's we are what we are, and definitely it wasn't a case of bringing in session players, because that would have undermined the chemistry, would have undermined the personality, and would have undermined the character that was there. And you can pick apart. I mean, Stephen makes a couple of blunders in the middle of Paradise City. Nobody notices.
Exactly.
Nobody notices. You know, I put on a benefit here. It's the only time I've ever promoted a show. I put on a benefit out here in Prescott, because we had 19 firefighters who got killed in one dreadful accident fighting a fire just south of town. And Slash, bless his beautiful heart, came out to perform. And he got up at something like 5 o'clock in the morning in Toronto, flew down to Phoenix, and then I had a driver pick him up and bring him up here. He arrived with a small bag that had his pajamas, what he uses for pajamas, his toothbrush and his hairbrush in it, and that was it. Okay, no guitar, no tech. no rig, no pickups, no pedals, no nothing. He left it entirely to me, which was trust, but he should know he could trust me by now. So he just turned up, what guitar am I playing? What's the rig? What's this? What's that? Had it all dialed for him. I've forgotten where I was going with that. What were we talking about? God knows.
Well, we
What
were just talking about session players and the fact that
Oh,
would have changed the chemistry of the band.
yeah. I forget why I went off on that tangent. There was actually a point at some point, but I forgot where it went. But, basically, no ringers ever in anybody I worked with.
Well, and I'm glad you brought up Paradise City, and it's funny, right? Because I didn't know there was a couple of clubs in there, but some
Oh,
of my
I
yeah,
remember where we were going. So I put the band together to play with him. And I had we were doing this out at the rodeo ground, so I had a really good space as they could rehearse and say, hello, what's my name? And the first thing that Slash said, because I told him which songs I'd rehearsed them for, he turns around and he says, did you figure out the fuck-ups in Paradise? And I'm looking at Slash and going, yeah, we're prepped, we're good.
well, and I mean that's on to me. It's funny, like the last chaotic part where there's just the time change and the footwork that he does at the end of that is for a guy that quote unquote doesn't know what he's doing is some pretty precise athletic and bombastic footwork at the end of that tune.
If you're going to be a fucking drummer and if you're going to have a double kick, you'd better be able to fucking play it. All right? Putting it on a screen and having a fucking computer do it for you is bullshit. All right? And if it moves a little bit, it moves a little bit. I mean, think about Charlie Watts. Think about, is it Honky Tonk Women? The tempo of the song when it starts out and the tempo when it finishes.
Yep.
Yeah, it's like, it's extreme, but it works. Playing music is pushing and pulling, pushing and pulling. And a drummer has to be able to do that. A drummer has, just in general, you kind of lean into a chorus. When you're coming out of a chorus, you kind of lean back just a little bit, to set up the verse feel. But the minute you start letting a fucking computer do it, it's not a rock and roll song anymore. It's a computer readout.
That's fair.
And that don't move me.
No, for sure. When we weren't allowed to go out and play, and I'd be home late at night, and I geeked out. I found some stuff on YouTube that's isolated drum tracks of certain things, and the two that I hooked onto, "Love Ramble On" by Zeppelin and
Okay.
Highway Star by Deep Purple, and just the
Okay.
isolated drum tracks. You sit there and you listen to them, and obviously they're amazing, but there's little lazy parts in there that when you hear them, it's kind of like that's what a real person's playing it.
Well, not only that, but if you're playing them in isolation, you're not necessarily, I mean, maybe you were, but you may not necessarily be remembering what else is going on there. What's the guitar player doing at that moment? What's the vocalist doing at that moment? It's a reason for him to pull back. So listening in isolation, yeah, you're going to go, well, that's not perfect, but I've always believed this. The perfection in recording lies in the ability to know the imperfections to keep.
Ooh, I like that.
And as soon as you're in front of a computer, that is compromised. If somebody's playing a guitar track and they're leaning in to watch the computer and its tempo, then I'm going, no. Play it with feel. Of course, sometimes the advantage is, especially if it's a matter of not having funding, then okay, you put something together on the computer, and you can adjust things really quickly, and it's not going to take 2 days to get a track out of a drummer because he keeps fucking up at the end, and
Right.
you've got to start over each time. You know, that makes sense, and you make the most of it. But when you're recording with digital, you've got to sit there with an analog consciousness and make it feel and sound as analog as you can. It's one of the reasons I love working with Chris Katera, because he knows, that I'm a grumpy old fart like that, and he works with that grumpy old fartdom.
Well, I mean, I love it because I was listening to something. It was one of the, I'll call it the, new rock songs or new rock bands. The drums sounded so precise; it sounded like a drum machine, and I could tell that it was Pro Tooled. Just everything seemed triggered, and there was no swing. It was just da 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 da. And my comment was, it's just like I'm missing the kind of the human element. It was a human playing it, but it just sounded so robotic.
Did you watch the that long Beatles thing that they put out recently?
I did, yes.
Yes. Were you like me? Did you binge it all in one go?
I tried to. I didn't get all the way through it. It was a couple parts for me, but I tried to.
No. Once I got going on that, I couldn't stop. I mean, there were so many aspects of it that I was just like, what the fuck? One of the things that I took away from it that made me smile was I could not remember through the entire transmission a single moment where John or Paul or George, for that matter, told Ringo what to do.
Hmm.
And that stuck out to me. All the way through it, Ringo knew what he wanted to do. And the other thing that I find fascinating about Ringo is he's got a certain feel, and it's not about perfection, it's about his personality. But his personality is also formed by the fact that he's a lefty,
Right.
playing a right kit. I mean, when I cottoned onto that, I was like, holy fuck. Because I was watching these drinking with his left hand.
Yep. Yep.
All right. And then he's getting onto a right-handed kit. And I'm going, how the fuck did that happen? That's amazing. But it explained a lot about how he plays things. And of course, the other thing is that the smaller the kit, usually the more inventive the player.
You have to, absolutely. You don't have more stuff to hit and what have you.
Yeah.
It's you bring up an interesting point about Ringo, and his style, because there's certain drummers like Don Henley to me would be a drummer where people go, it's Don Henley, but you try to play what Don Henley plays back in the Eagles, nobody plays it with the same feel. Ringo would be.
Well, hold on there a minute.
Okay.
First of all, Don Henley is what we call a drum tickler.
Do tell.
Okay. Oh, do tell. Stephen had fucked up his hand or done fucking something, and we had an awards show. I don't know if it was AMAs or MTV, or it was one of those big televised award shows coming up, and we were going to be performing on it. And Slash and I were in conversation and slightly perturbed about, well, do we pull it, or do we want to do the show, or do we try and find someone to sit in? And we decided, let's see if we can get someone to sit in. And I went, aha, I know a drummer of a certain profile who owes me a favor. And it was Henley. So I got a hold of Henley and I said, would you sit in? Will you come and rehearse one song and perform this one song on TV? And he said, sure. We were at Mates in rehearsal with Don, and I'm sitting there on the couch, all covered in shit and burns and so on, but feeling like I was luxuriating in a moment. There's my band, and that's Henley playing drums with them. And I'm a huge Eagles fan at the time. Still am, I suppose. And I'm just luxuriating in watching it. And Slash comes off his. The stage is small, it's about 9 inches high. Slash steps off and starts coming towards me, motioning with his head, and I go up and he whispers something in my ear, and I look at him and I go, "You're out of your mind, there's no fucking way." And he kind of looks at me and goes back. And as he goes back, Duff comes down and says almost exactly the same thing in my ear. And Duff's a little taller than me, and he stared down at me and went, "Niv." All right. So I walk up on the stage and I stand right next to Henley where he's playing. And he ignores me. And he kind of looks up and keeps going, ignores me. And eventually he turns around and he goes, "What?" And I go, "Don, this is a rock and roll band. Can you hit the drums hard enough for the rest of the band to hear it?" He started laying in. Back end of that story, we were doing Farm Aid in Indianapolis. I think it was in '90 or something. And I'm backstage, and there's Hendy walking through the crowd straight towards me, and he's got Carl Perkins standing with him, coming with him. So at that moment, I'm like, okay, I've got to deal with Don, and that's fucking Carl Perkins. I used to sing his Blue Suede Shoes song in the car with my mom. I mean, I was just shriveling into fanboy for a moment, you know, these two big Texans coming at me. Henry walks up to me and he goes, "Well, motherfucker, did I hit the drums hard enough for you tonight?" No,
fair enough.
Meet Carl Perkins. "Hi, Alan, how are you?" He just came up and he goes, "Well, motherfucker, did I hit the drums hard enough for you tonight?"
Fair enough. But you know what? If you're used to playing with somebody that's heavy-handed, you know, to your point, being a drum tickler is probably not what they're looking for, right?
Yeah, well, it's a rock and roll band, Don. Drive it.
Fair enough.
You know, and you know, I mean, I think most people know that there was this kind of dynamic in the Eagles where what was the rhythm guitar player's name?
Glenn Fry.
Glenn Fry. Yeah, Glenn Fry, and you know, and Bob Seger was a close friend of his when he was growing up. He always wanted to be a rock and roll band, and Don was a little more Texan, a little more countrified.
Right.
And there was always that kind of dynamic between the two of them about who was going to prevail and how it was going to work. And Henley won.
So, I mean, you've probably been asked questions about Appetite forever, but you know, we're gonna talk drums here because you know, obviously, I'm a drummer, and you're somebody who's recorded drummers before. There was no click track used on that album, correct?
Not to my knowledge.
Timing was great. I mean, things ebb and flow, and you know, there's little pieces here to speed up and slow down. But from sonically, everything that album's brilliant.
Not to my knowledge. I should be able to remember specifically because Lardy and I did the very first mix of Appetite with Brownstone, because poor Mike got so fucking exhausted he couldn't even form a mix, and Giffen was starting to panic. You know, do we even have it on tape? You know, why can't he form a mix? And I said, and I was in the middle of doing a Great White album down in the South Bay. And I said, okay, go to the studio, get a box, a 2-inch, and send it down, and we'll look at it, and we'll tell you what's on it. And we were in the middle of doing, I don't know, I think we were in the middle of doing guitar overdubs or something. So we had to strip the board down, prep for a mix. The box turned up. We put up the 2-inch, and in 4 hours, we had an initial mix of Brownstone. And it was there, and I definitely don't recall hearing a pointed click track on there. But there again, when I was recording with somebody, I'd never use a pointed click track. I'd always use a shaker. So that you don't have a defined point in the beat, but you have a beginning, a middle, and an end to the beat that goes shh, and you can actually move against it, and it's not going to regiment in your head.
That's fair. And I mean, you know, as somebody that's recorded, I've done it both ways, and you know, I don't mind a click track. I've practiced with it, and I'm used to it. But sometimes, you know, it's tough because if you get other musicians that can't play with it, it really kind of affects the way that things can happen and take shape when you're recording.
My my preferred option is to use a shaker as a click track. You know, so you've got a point of reference there. You've got something that you can cut to, but you don't have something that is aggravating. How can you get into the feel of something if something's going tick, 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 tick in your head? I mean, you're just gonna want to take those headphones off and just see how far they can fly.
Um, so in our first segment, you were talking about moving the kick drum, and you're actually talking about, you know, sliders and what have you. And I'd be interested to know, like, you know, now that we have Pro Tools and everything is done on a computer, but I remember talking to a producer one time, and he was talking about almost using a version of Auto Tune where he had to slow the tape down because they couldn't get a singer to sing in key properly, and so that's how they did it. It was all this very mechanical, you know, like you're flying the plane all the time on your own, right? Do you recall being or being part of recordings where you had to do that with maybe drummers or things like that took place?
If we didn't get the take, then we'd come back and do it again. And you're always evaluating somebody's mental energy. Are they into it? Do they think they've really got it? Are they getting pissed and fatigued? Um, Recording any album from was as much management of energy as anything else. I got to a point where I wouldn't allow anybody in the studio if they were drinking or high, and I'd bring somebody else into work. And momentum was always a consideration to me on a daily basis in the studio. I never wanted somebody to feel defeated. I never wanted to get bogged down. I always wanted to move on through the day and get something that I knew we were going to use. So there was always a sense of momentum, and the band members would be moving around in terms of overdubs. In terms of doing your basic tracks, again, you're reading the room, seeing how they're doing, and your responsibility is just to know that moment of going, that one works, all right, and to not do it out of fear, to not do it out of excessive precision. I had an infallible way of knowing the right moment in the studio. So my arms would break out in goosebumps. If a track was laid down and my arms would just explode in goosebumps, the next thing out of my mouth was, don't even fucking touch that. That's it. That's perfect. Oh, but in this bar, no. That's it. That's the feel. Perfection, you know, as I said before, perfection doesn't belong in rock and roll. The perfection in rock and roll is knowing which imperfections to keep. I mean, Ringo wasn't perfect all the time, but he was kind of perfect all the time.
Yeah, right. Well, so when you mentioned those two flubs in Paradise City, would they have been left there because the rest of the track just moved and sat where it needed to be,
Yes,
and it was just
exactly.
like, that's why.
Exactly. Exactly. You know, and auto tuning. I mean, if you can find it, there's a double live record by Great White called Stage. Get a hold of that and keep in mind that when you're hearing it, that I will look you right in the eye and say, this live set did not have a single studio overdub later, which was common practice. When you were recording live stuff, you went, yeah, let's fix that. That was a real clunker. Let's fix that. That particular set, and it's two different nights, not a single corrective overdub. We just mixed it. And that'll tell you what a band is. You know, that was them at their apex, at their height, and they could go out there and they could just nail it.
Well, that is incredible because you hear about some of those, classic live albums that were, I think Kiss Alive is one that, outside of the drums, it was right. It was pretty much a studio album, correct?
Don't talk to me about Kiss.
Fair enough.
Possibly, without doubt, the most overrated band of all time, American band of all time. Just no.
Okay, we're gonna get you back on
I
track.
have unless they're from Florida or Mississippi, unless they're from Georgia, I have a hard time dealing with most bands that come from the East Coast. They don't get it. Manhattan bands, new bands, just don't get it. It amazes me that Blondie came out of New York.
Hmm.
It really does. But most of them just don't get it.
What do
You
you
know,
think that is?
because there's an awful lot of posing and an awful lot of pretense that gets in the way, makes things fake. And I very, very rarely hear something fake coming out of the South. I'm listening for the for the rustle of Spanish moss in the tracks.
So just back one last thing about Appetite, and we'll move on to some other drummers. Do you remember him being because I mean they had, I guess, probably recorded some other things, but do you remember him being quick in the studio, or was it what was the process like? Was it long, short? Did he just get in there, do his business, and off he went?
Who, Stephen?
Yeah.
Um, there was a little bit of work. There was more work on vocals and guitars. And bear in mind that that album, that debut album, cost $365,000. That is a huge sum of money for a debut record. Only Geffen Records would have spent that amount of money. And my first acquaintance with insomnia came during that process because I'd just become a father for the first time and I'm lying in bed and going, what the fuck am I doing here? I'm never going to see a dime out of this band. With 365,000 in the hole on the album, we've got videos to shoot, we've got tour support to come. They are going to be in the hole forever. What do I know?
Well, yeah, lo and behold, it did okay.
It did all right in the end.
Yeah, not so
What
bad,
do I
right?
know? I mean, by comparative, I used to deliver the Great White records that I produced for, on the average, $115,000. And Capitol didn't know how I did it. Well, I did it by being organized, straight up. And I did it because my first rule of recording is pre-production, 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 pre-production. I want to know every beat and every note before we go in. And then I want the band to be confident in what they're playing. And at that point, you're in a position where you can get the happy accident, the moment of spontaneity that you didn't think about, the thing that happens where you go, oh, what the fuck? I used to keep a half inch running all the time when I was in the studio in case somebody played something and I said, what was that? Do it again. And I wouldn't have to hear, oh, I don't know, I've forgotten already. I'd have it on the half inch. I used to keep a half inch running all the time to catch anything that might go that way.
Smart, smart. So obviously, I mean, I knew that you had a hand in producing and what have you, but since we're talking about drummers, any drummer that you've worked with, is there one that maybe stands out as one that you like to work with more than anybody else without, making anybody else feel bad?
Um, there's a guy who lives here in town called Michael Thompson, and I love his feel and his attitude and the way he plays. And he's a local yokel, and he's really good.
I'd love to hear stories like that because it's like
He
sometimes
he was
sometimes the local guys aren't good enough. You know what I mean? And there's
yeah.
a lot of
Well,
amazing people in your backyard.
yeah. Well, first of all, we need to be careful because every time we use the word local, that's going to put an attitude in somebody's frame of mind. Mike, I can't remember the name of it. Mike was in some punk band years ago, and he was out on what was that awful punk tour that ran for ages? Damn, I can't remember its name. And his band was out on that. I mean, he got out and he played a little bit. But we've done some things together. The first recording for Chris Buck, you probably haven't heard his name yet, but if you look him up or look up his band, Cardinal Black, I mean, he's considered maybe the best guitar player in the UK at the moment. And his first recording was when we flew him out on his 21st birthday because his band walked away from him. And we thought, fuck, if we don't do something with him, he's just going to get depressed and go into his bedroom in his parents' house and we'll never see him again. So we flew him out. We didn't have a band, we didn't have songs, we didn't have anything. And got Mike Thompson and a really fabulous personality, Jimmy Mack, a black bass player who played with all kinds of people. We put the three of them together and it was magical. And it was in a tiny little podunk studio here in Prescott. The record's called Postcards from Capricorn. See if you can find a copy.
That's fantastic. Well, you know what? It's hard to believe, my friend, but we are out of time.
That was another half hour.
Yeah. So,
pleasure talking with you. I hope it's of some interest to your followers.
It will absolutely be of interest to my followers, and I thank you, sir. And you enjoy the rest of your daytime where you are. And
I most certainly will. I'm going to think about going and having breakfast.
You should, and I'm threatening to get out there because I told Katero and a couple of the other guys that I'm going to get out. So hopefully I'll be able to meet you if I do.
Well, absolutely, you should. The only thing I'd say is wait until after September.
Yeah, it'll be the winter time one in here for sure.
Yeah, wait until the heat is gone, and when you got snow up to your kneecaps, that's when you get on a plane.
Yes, sir. Pleasure. Have a great night.
Peace.